The air inside the Georgetown lecture hall was thick with anticipation. Bright lights buzzed overhead, and the crowd of Ivy League students and media elites leaned forward, waiting for sparks to fly. On stage sat Hillary Clinton, former Secretary of State, Democratic icon, and liberal titan, with her signature smirk already forming. Next to her, straight-backed and poised, sat Karoline Leavitt, 27 years old, press secretary under Donald Trump and one of the youngest firebrands in modern politics. The debate had been advertised as a multi-generational dialogue on democracy, but everyone in the room knew what it really was, a clash between the old guard and the unapologetic new. Cameras flashed. Microphones were hot. And the moment the moderator finished her polite introductions, Hillary pounced. "Well," Hillary said with a wry chuckle, adjusting her blazer, "I'm thrilled to be here, especially sharing the stage with someone who probably still thinks Snapchat is news and TikTok is foreign policy." Laughter rippled through the audience, mostly nervous. Karoline didn't flinch. She turned slowly toward Clinton, her eyes sharp but calm, hands folded neatly over her lap. She didn't take the bait, not yet. "You know," Hillary continued, voice oozing condescension, "when I was your age, we were busy passing legislation. These days, it seems your generation just tweets at it." Karoline raised her eyebrows slightly. Still, she stayed quiet, letting Clinton bask for a second longer in her own applause. But her silence wasn't surrender, it was strategy. The moderator tried to steer the conversation back. "Let's talk about the future of women in politics." "I'd like to respond," Karoline said, her voice cutting cleanly through the noise. The room shifted. Hillary's smile froze for a second. Karoline leaned forward, her words steady but laced with quiet steel. "With all due respect, Secretary Clinton, I don't need to be twice your age to know that America's tired of being told how to think. You had 30 years. The country still has broken borders, sky-high inflation, and trust in leadership is near zero. My generation didn't cause that. Yours did." The audience murmured. Hillary blinked, surprised by the precision of the strike. "And while you mock TikTok," Karoline added, "maybe you should have spent more time understanding how young people communicate, instead of deleting emails." Gasps. A few stunned chuckles. The energy in the room flipped instantly. Hillary's face tightened for a brief second, just enough to show the hit had landed. But decades in politics had taught her to recover fast. She gave a tight smile, tilted her head, and spoke in that signature patronizing tone. "Well, Karoline," she began, "what you call experience, I call perspective. And what you see as failed leadership, others might call hard-won wisdom. Perhaps if you'd spent more time in the Senate gallery than on Instagram, you'd understand that nuance matters." The crowd chuckled again, but more cautiously this time. Karoline crossed her legs, still composed, her expression unreadable. Then, without breaking eye contact, she replied, "And perhaps if your administration had listened to Middle America, they wouldn't have lost entire states to Trump without even seeing it coming." That one stung. Hillary leaned forward, her voice sharper now. "We won the popular vote." Karoline didn't even let her finish. "You also lost Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, Secretary Clinton. Working-class voters didn't want hashtags. They wanted jobs." The moderator sat frozen between them, her stack of questions abandoned. The debate had turned into a duel. "You speak of wisdom," Karoline continued, her voice rising just enough to command the room, "but you led the State Department during the Libya disaster, called half the country a basket of deplorables, and still walked away blaming everyone but yourself. My generation? We grew up watching the fallout of decisions made behind podiums like yours, and we're done playing nice about it." The room was dead silent. One camera light flickered nervously in the back. Then Clinton shot back. "You think you know what public service is just because you interned in the West Wing? Sweetheart, I've sat across from heads of state while you were still memorizing TikTok dances." Karoline smirked. "And yet somehow," she said, "I managed to connect with more Americans in a 2-minute Fox interview than you did in a 2-hour campaign speech." Several gasps echoed through the crowd. Even the moderator let out an involuntary breath. Karoline turned back toward the audience now, not just speaking to Clinton, but to everyone watching, in the room and across millions of screens. "This isn't about age," she said. "It's about accountability. The future doesn't belong to whoever's been in Washington the longest. It belongs to whoever still listens to the people outside of it." Applause broke out. This time, not nervous, but electric. The applause rippled across the room like a rogue wave, catching even the moderator off guard. Hillary Clinton shifted in her chair, her polished composure slightly fractured. She glanced toward the crowd, no longer receiving the effortless nods she was used to. Some students clapped. Some just stared, unsure if they had just witnessed a generational shift unfold in real time. Karoline, for her part, sat tall, hands resting on her lap like nothing seismic had just happened. Her voice had not cracked. Her message had not wandered. It was clinical, controlled, devastating. The moderator finally tried to regain control. "Let's pivot now to the issue of civic engagement. Secretary Clinton, how do you see young women getting involved in shaping democracy?" Clinton inhaled deeply, composing herself like a veteran on the ropes. "Look," she said, turning to the audience with the gravitas she'd wielded for decades, "I commend anyone, regardless of age, who wants to participate in public life. But passion without process is chaos. And the last few years have shown us what happens when the loudest voices drown out experienced leadership." It was a backhanded slap at Karoline, cloaked in concern. Karoline responded, her tone calm but laser-sharp. "With all due respect, process didn't protect veterans who waited months for care at the VA. It didn't stop inflation from gutting middle-class families. And it sure didn't hold anyone accountable after 4 Americans died in Benghazi. Sometimes, Madam Secretary, the loudest voices are the ones finally being heard, after years of being ignored." The moderator froze again. This wasn't a policy panel anymore. It was a reckoning. Cameras captured every twitch of Hillary's brow, every carefully managed breath. She looked over at Karoline with the faintest smirk, the kind that said, "You've made yourself a threat." Outside the lecture hall, social media was already detonating. Hashtags like hashtag Karoline clapped back and hashtag youth versus legacy were trending within minutes. Clips of Karoline's Benghazi line were being spliced and shared with bold captions like, "She did not hold back." Inside the room, the energy shifted again. Clinton supporters started murmuring defensively. Karoline supporters, many of them previously quiet, now leaned forward in their chairs, nodding. Even neutral observers sensed it. This wasn't just a sparring match. It was an ideological split screen between two Americas, one clinging to its history, the other demanding its future. And Karoline? She wasn't blinking. The moderator's voice quivered slightly as she tried to steer the discussion back toward safer ground. "Let's turn to foreign policy," she said, flipping her note card like it was a shield. "Secretary Clinton, what's your perspective on America's current global image?" Hillary took a slow sip of water, buying time. "The world," she began carefully, "respects experience. It respects consistency. And while the last administration damaged many of our alliances, we've begun to rebuild them. It takes decades to earn trust and minutes to lose it." Karoline didn't wait. "Respect is earned not just abroad, but at home too," she said. "And Americans don't feel respected when leaders smile on stage and leave working families behind. Global diplomacy starts with domestic honesty, something that was lacking when the Clinton Foundation was taking foreign donations during your tenure at state." That drew audible gasps. Clinton's eyes narrowed. "That's a tired conspiracy theory," she snapped, voice sharpened. "It's been debunked countless times." Karoline responded coolly, "Then you should have nothing to fear from transparency. Release every donor record, every communication, and let Americans judge for themselves. If there's nothing to hide, there's nothing to worry about." The moderator had stopped speaking entirely. Her role now was simply to witness. Hillary leaned forward, trying to reclaim moral high ground. You're too young to understand how complex governing really is. The real world isn't cable news or Twitter hashtags. Karoline didn't flinch. You're right. I'm young, but I'm not naive. I've seen how polished politics masks public failure. If you were proud of the legacy you left, you wouldn't spend so much time rewriting it. Even Clinton's most loyal aides in the front row were now stone-faced. The tension crackled. Meanwhile, outside the auditorium, conservative news outlets were in overdrive. Clips of Karoline's takedown were already headlining segments titled, "The Night Hillary Got Fact-Checked in Real Time." Liberal networks scrambled to reframe the moment, emphasizing Clinton's poise under provocation. But inside, the energy had unmistakably shifted. Karoline wasn't just surviving, she was dominating. And the crowd knew it. Even Clinton, the woman who had debated heads of state and stood at the apex of American power, was visibly recalibrating. Because across from her sat not just a young conservative firebrand, but a new kind of political force, calm, unshaken, and unapologetically armed with receipts. And that kind of threat couldn't be brushed off with a smug grin. Hillary straightened in her seat, the glint in her eye shifting from amusement to calculation. For the first time that night, she wasn't reacting as a seasoned stateswoman, she was reacting as a wounded combatant. The crowd felt it. That signature Clinton armor, polished over decades of power, now showed hairline fractures. "If this is the future of your party," she said, voice tight, "then America is in trouble." Vitriol and division dressed up as patriotism doesn't fix anything. Karoline tilted her head slightly. Coming from someone who once labeled millions of Americans as a basket of deplorables, I'd say you've mastered division quite well, Secretary Clinton. Another ripple moved through the crowd, not laughter, not gasps this time. It was unease. This wasn't a debate anymore, it was a reckoning. Karoline went on. "You spent decades in Washington, and what do we have to show for it? A nation more polarized, less secure, drowning in debt and distrust. But my generation? We're done playing nice with broken systems. We don't want photo ops. We want results." Clinton's jaw clenched, but she kept her tone civil, at least on the surface. "It's easy to criticize when you haven't built anything," she replied. "I've negotiated ceasefires, advised presidents, traveled the world. And still couldn't secure the trust of your own country," Karoline cut in, without raising her voice. "You lost to Donald Trump. And now, years later, you still can't understand why." Silence. Dead, crushing silence. Even the moderator blinked hard, looking down at her notes like they might shield her from the heat. Hillary's face darkened, the blow too precise to ignore. She let out a small exhale, hands folded tighter on the table. "You'll learn in time," she said, "how easy it is to throw stones from the cheap seats. And how lonely it is when the cameras go off." Karoline looked at her, not with scorn but with conviction. "I'm not here for the cameras. I'm here because your generation failed to listen. You talked at us, you lectured us, you mocked us. And now you're shocked that we're talking back." The applause didn't explode, it started slowly, then gathered momentum. Students. Journalists. Even a few academics near the back. And Hillary saw it. She was witnessing the very thing she'd underestimated her entire career, the arrival of a challenger who didn't want to be her, and didn't need to. Karoline didn't just survive on that stage. She started a quiet revolution. The tension in the room was no longer simmering, it was alive. Like a charged wire humming with unspoken energy. Hillary adjusted her microphone, but even that movement felt heavier now. It was clear to everyone that Karoline hadn't just defended herself, she'd flipped the entire dynamic of the debate. For years, Clinton had walked onto stages like this and commanded silence without effort. Her legacy loomed large: war rooms, world summits, the Situation Room. But Karoline's strength wasn't in experience, it was in conviction. And suddenly, that counted for more. "I'll give you this," Hillary said, her voice calmer, but colder. You're a sharp speaker. But when you have to make real choices, with real consequences, it's not so simple. Grandstanding doesn't pass legislation. Karoline didn't flinch. Neither does global speaking tours post-failure, she responded, her tone level, almost clinical. We've watched political icons lecture us from private jets and billion-dollar foundations while middle America crumbles. That's not leadership, it's legacy management. The audience stirred again, unsure whether to applaud or just absorb the blow. Clinton narrowed her eyes. You speak in slogans, not solutions. I speak in facts, Karoline replied, sliding a small card from her folder and placing it on the table. You voted for the Iraq War, called it a mistake years later, then ran on your foreign policy judgment. You supported mass surveillance. You once claimed women who accused your husband of assault were part of a vast right-wing conspiracy. She paused. Forgive me, she added dryly, for not taking lectures on truth from someone with that resume. Now the crowd erupted. Applause, laughter, and gasps blended into a raw, unscripted symphony of disbelief. Even Hillary blinked, her mask slipping, if only for a second. The moderator cleared her throat, visibly rattled. Let's move on to closing statements. But the damage had been done. Karoline leaned back, her voice quieter now but cutting through the noise like a blade. This isn't about me replacing you. It's about people like me finally having the courage to say what others are too afraid to. We're not waiting for permission anymore. Clinton said nothing. She simply looked ahead, lips pressed tight, a political veteran who'd underestimated her opponent's reach. This wasn't just a soundbite war. This was generational justice, delivered live. The debate ended with a polite thank you from the moderator, but the energy in the room lingered like heat after a wildfire. Clinton exited the stage first, a practiced smile stretched tight across her face, her aide whispering rapidly into her ear. She nodded once, coldly. Her heels clicked fast across the floor, retreat disguised as dignity. Karoline, by contrast, stayed behind. Students, some starstruck, some just stunned, started to gather around her. A few professors stood off to the side, uncertain whether they'd just witnessed a disrespectful outburst or a seismic generational shift. A student journalist from the campus paper rushed forward, recorder in hand. Karoline, did you come here tonight planning to confront Secretary Clinton like that? Karoline smiled, polite but firm. I came to speak the truth. If it sounded like confrontation, maybe that says something about what we've normalized. Outside, the story had already taken flight. Cable news anchors debated the optics. Liberal pundits dismissed Karoline as audacious and undisciplined. But conservative voices hailed her as a fresh blade in a political world dulled by deference. On Twitter, or X, as it was now called, clips of the exchange between her and Clinton were clipped, remixed, and stamped with captions like, Gen Z just schooled the queen of the establishment. Karoline Leavitt just did what the GOP couldn't for 20 years. This is how you take down an empire, with facts. And yet, the most striking responses weren't loud. They came in DMs, emails. Messages from veterans, single moms, teachers, young conservatives who'd felt invisible, until now. One email simply read, I've voted Democrat all my life. Tonight, I listened. Thank you. Another said, I'm 21. Never saw anyone close to my age take on someone like her. I'm not scared anymore. Karoline stared at her screen long after midnight. She knew this wasn't just a debate. It was a challenge, and an invitation. The old world wasn't ready to step aside. But she wasn't asking anymore. Across the country, the political machine started spinning, press teams assembling counterattacks, op-ed writers crafting hit pieces. But it didn't matter. The moment had landed. Not perfectly. Not without risk. But it had landed in people's hearts, and that's where revolutions start. The next morning, Karoline's name trended second on X, right behind #HillarySnapped. But trending wasn't always triumph. The political establishment had been wounded, and it was already circling the wagons. Morning talk shows painted Karoline as reckless, disrespectful, and an example of today's toxic youth. On The View, Joy Behar dramatically rolled her eyes and said, "Just because you can talk fast and wear a blazer doesn't make you a leader." Sunny Hostin called it an embarrassment to political discourse. But the narrative wasn't landing the way they hoped. Clips of Karoline holding her ground were being reposted by everyday Americans, truck drivers, teachers, small business owners. One blue-collar veteran stitched a clip on TikTok, saying, "That girl stood her ground. Hillary sneered at her youth, and she didn't blink. That's grit." Still, the pushback from the old guard escalated. That afternoon, Clinton's longtime ally and former campaign chair, Marcy Lennox, penned an op-ed in the Washington Echo titled, "Why Experience Still Matters." In it, she accused Karoline of performative outrage and disrespecting the legacy of women who built the path she now walks on. Karoline read the piece twice, once for content, and again to confirm just how little they understood her. She drafted her response not for the Echo, but directly on social media, with her usual sharp brevity. Respecting the past doesn't mean submitting to it. Experience is valuable. Arrogance disguised as legacy is not. The post hit 4 million views in 3 hours. Behind the scenes, conservative strategists started to take notice. Donors began calling. Political action groups wanted meetings. Some warned her to tone it down, to play the long game. But Karoline wasn't playing. Back in her apartment, modest, with campaign posters and policy books stacked beside her desk, she sat with a cup of tea, her mind racing. She knew what was next. If she kept pushing, they'd dig into her past. Twist her words. Go after her family, maybe even her faith. But she also knew something else. She wasn't just challenging Clinton. She was exposing a system that mocked youth, dismissed faith, and treated boldness as betrayal. And if that system came for her, good. Because she was ready. By day 3, the media knives were fully out. An anonymously sourced segment on a primetime cable network claimed Karoline once made an insensitive joke in college. The clip? Grainy, out of context, and 5 years old. But that didn't matter. The Chiron read. Rising conservative star, is Karoline Leavitt too extreme for the national stage? Pundits who once ignored her now dissected her every sentence. Her family was contacted by journalists. A photographer staked out her church. Her former classmates were being cold-called. One paper ran a story with the headline, "From Intern to Instigator, the Radical Rise of Karoline Leavitt." And yet, the numbers didn't lie. Her following had doubled. Emails to her campaign website crashed the server. People weren't backing away, they were rallying. Still, Karoline wasn't immune. She sat on the edge of her bed late one night, staring at a dim phone screen filled with vile comments. One message simply read, "You'll never be more than a girl with a podium and daddy issues." She took a breath. She didn't cry. But she didn't pretend it didn't sting either. In moments like that, she didn't think about Clinton or debates or trending hashtags. She thought about her grandfather, a World War II veteran, who always said, "If they're firing at you, you're over the target." The next day, she walked into a local town hall in Ohio, not a studio, not a stage. A dusty, fluorescent-lit room with 50 folding chairs and a table of cold coffee. And she brought the same fire. A man in the back, Vietnam hat tilted, raised his hand and asked, "Karoline, you think they'll let you win?" She smiled. "They won't let me. But we don't need their permission. We need each other's courage." The crowd nodded. No lights. No cameras. Just truth. When the event ended, a teenage girl approached her, braces, nervous, eyes wide. She whispered, "My mom says you're loud, but I think you're brave." Karoline knelt and replied with a quiet grin, "Tell your mom both can be true." That night, as headlines swirled and networks screamed, Karoline sat at her kitchen table, alone, grounded, and certain. They could mock her age, her voice, her courage. But they couldn't stop what had already begun. Washington buzzed with scandal, strategy, and spin, but none of it could drown out the echo of Karoline's words from that debate stage. Clinton's team tried to recover. They blamed editorial bias, claimed selective editing, and even sent out a press release quoting Hillary as saying she welcomed debate from women of all ages, if it was respectful. But the damage was done. Clinton's smug laughter had become a meme. A 5-second clip of her chuckle followed by Karoline's deadpan stare had over 20 million views and a 3-word caption. This didn't age well. Even legacy media couldn't resist. A respected political analyst on a Sunday panel said, "I don't care what side of the aisle you're on, Karoline came prepared, and she made Hillary look like a relic." In the days that followed, something shifted, quietly, but decisively. Karoline began receiving calls from voters she never thought she'd reach. Working-class union guys. Inner-city moms. Disillusioned independents. Veterans, truckers. College students, first-generation immigrants. Not all agreed with her on policy, but almost all respected that she didn't back down. She was invited onto more programs, hostile ones, too. And she never declined. Every camera pointed at her became another opportunity. Not to grandstand, but to clarify. To cut through noise. To confront the machine that mocked her for being too young, too female, too loyal to conservative values. In one interview, a smirking host asked, "What makes you think you're ready for this?" Karoline leaned in and replied, "Because I've already survived the worst they can throw at me, and I'm still here." That clip alone sealed it. Within 2 weeks, her campaign donations tripled. Within a month, she led in 2 key swing states. And 6 weeks later, she stood in front of a sea of supporters, lights bathing her in warmth, American flags waving behind her, not as a footnote to Clinton, but as a frontrunner in her own right. Her final words that night echoed beyond the rally. "They laughed at me, they questioned me. But they forgot something. I never needed their permission, just your belief. And now, we lead." The crowd erupted. Not in anger, but in pride. She didn't just bury Clinton in facts. She buried the idea that she had to wait her turn. They mocked her for her youth. They doubted her because she wasn't part of the old club. But Karoline didn't ask for permission, she earned her place with grit, facts, and fearlessness. In a world where legacy names expect respect without earning it, she reminded us all. Respect is earned by truth, not tenure. This wasn't just a debate. This was a generational shift. If you believe in standing tall against condescension, if you believe that truth still matters more than titles, then this is your moment. Join us. Support the voice that speaks not for the elite, but for the forgotten.